Welcome back to API Test Hub. This is part 4 of our API testing series. In our previous video, we covered HTTP methods. Today, we are diving deep into HTTP status codes, understanding what they mean and why they are vital for API testing. Let's get started. So the first question is, why we need to learn HTTP status codes? Understanding HTTP status codes is crucial for API testing because they provide insights into how API behaves. Knowing these codes help you diagnose issues, ensure the API is robust and handles edge cases, and ultimately ensures the API delivers the expected results. As an API tester, you need to check that the server is responding correctly for all scenarios. Next comes the definition of HTTP status codes. So we have already seen in our previous videos that a client sends a request to the server and server gives back the response. So the question is how client knows if the request was successful or if something went wrong. So that's where HTTP status codes comes in. HTTP status codes are response codes sent by the server to indicate the result of client's request. Whenever a client sends a request to the server responds back with the HTTP status code with a message. These codes help understand what happened during the request. Was it successful or did something went wrong? They consist of three-digit numbers and a message like 200 OK. So we will be having a three-digit code number here and a message which indicates a status code. So let's look into the different categories of these codes. So these status codes are divided into basically five categories. The first one is the 1x codes. These are informational responses. These indicate the request has been received and the server is continuing the process. For example, 100 continue response. So what it does, it tells us that the server is continuing the request so that the client may know that this is the process being going on the server. So 1x series are the informational requests. So they define the information. Next comes the 2x series codes are the success responses. So whenever there is a success, the code will start from 2, meaning the request was successful and the server did what was expected. The most common one you will see is 200 OK, indicating that everything went smooth. Then comes the 3x codes, which are redirectional responses. These tell the client to take some action, such as following a URL to reach the requested resource. The URL maybe have moved to other location. So for example, 301. So what it will see, 301 moved permanently means the resource has been moved permanently to a new location. So 300 responses will give you a redirection. Next comes the 4x series. 4x codes indicate client errors. So these errors typically happen when something is wrong with the request from the client side. For example, a 400 bad request, which means that server is not able to understand the request due to some issue in the syntax from the client. So these are client side errors which starts from 400. Next comes the 5x series. 5x codes indicate server errors. So when there is an issue on server side, that status codes will start from 5. So these happen when the server fails to process the request for some reason. A 500 internal server error is a journal error message we see on API request. So every request which starts from the 5 is the server error request. So these are the 5 categories in which HTTP status codes are divided. So basically in REST APIs we will mostly use these kind of errors: the success, redirection, client and server, because in REST APIs client and server are the ones which are more used. So let's understand the most common errors or the HTTP status codes which we encounter in REST APIs, and while testing APIs you need to know about those status codes. So let's learn about them. We will be covering 2x and 3x status codes in this video, and in the upcoming video we will be covering 4x and 5x codes. So stay tuned and let's get started with 2x and 3x codes in detail. Let's understand the most commonly used HTTP status codes in REST APIs. So starting with 200 series, the most commonly used is the 200 OK response. So what it means? It is the response which server sends when the request is successful. When client sends a request to the server and server can process it successfully, then it will send back the server a response that it's 200 OK. So what happens internally? So this is an API. It's sending a request to the server. For example, we want to get the product details. So what I'm sending is a get request with a get method inside and a URI to the server. So server will get that request, will process it, and will see that do we have a data inside our server. So server can find that data, then it will send a response back. Yes, I have the data present, so it is okay for me. So I can send back you the results. So along with the response, it will send the client a 200 OK status code, with which the client will be able to know that okay, the my request of product is successful. Server has that response and I'm getting back the data. So 200 OK will tell the client that your request is successful. So let's understand it with one example from the real time scenario. So if you go here, there is a request. So how I can check that this was successful? First is I'm getting the data back. So if I go to my networks tab, I can see that there is a request to this particular URL and I'm getting back the request method and I'm getting back the response, which is the status code 200 OK. And what I was sending was the get method and a URL, and the server is responding back with me 200 OK and with the data. So that is what where the status code is helpful for the client to know that your request was successful. So 200 OK is the most commonly used status code in REST APIs especially. So whenever you are testing an API, so when you see the 200 OK response, that means the request you are sending to the server is okay and you are getting back the data. Validation comes the next part, but 200 OK means the server has processed your request successfully. So that was the 200 OK request. Next comes in the 200 series is again the 201 created status code. So what it means? So 201 created means that your resource is successfully created. So what it means is, so we have already discussed previously, like in the previous videos, that post method is used to create the resources in the server. So whenever an API is sending a request, example here, when an API is sending a request, for example, this post request to add a product to the server. So server will see that it has got post methods. So that means it has to do something with creation. So what it will do, that it will create the data with the request body it has received, and it will create the data. So how client will know that whatever details you have sent to the server, it has been created. So server, after creating your data, it will send back the response with 201 OK created status code. So whatever response, successful response, and with this status code will let the client know that your product has been added to the cart or to the server. So that is the 201. So it is basically used whenever you have to tell the client that your data has been created, the new entry has been created to the server, then we use this 201 created. So whenever you are testing that API, so whenever there is a situation, for example, you are adding a new user, then A201 is expected. If you are getting something else, then you need to report that, because 201 is mostly used for creation. So that is the status code in 200 series. So next comes again the 200 series code, that is 204. So it is also a successful response code as it starts from 2. So what it means, so it means is that, like, the success is successful, the request is successful, but in turn you don't have anything to return. So when it is used, so this particular code is used when you have to delete something. For example, you want to delete something from the cart. So what you are sending, the client is sending a delete request to the server, like, delete this product from the cart. So server will see, like, okay, I'm getting the delete request, then I have to delete something. But this is operation and it should be successful, right? So that is why it starts from 2. So what it will do, it will delete the data. So it has deleted the data, and server has to inform API that the data is deleted. So how it will inform? It will inform with the status code 204 with no content. So because the data is not there now. So how it will inform the client that your data is not there, but I have deleted it. So it will just give the 201, 204 no content status code, and with no content, with no response back. Then client will come to know that, okay, your data has been deleted, and the request was successful. So with the status code, the client will be able to know that your request was successful. So this was about 204 no content. Next in the 200 series is 206 partial content status code. So it's a response code that tells the client that only a portion of the requested resource is being delivered, not the full response. So it is little different from 200 OK response, because in 200 you get the whole response back, but in 206 you will get the partial response. So it is a successful response, but not the full response, it's a partial one. So what happens here is, whenever there is a request to download, for example, to the server, but you don't want to download it in a one go, so what will happen, the server will stop it or pause it for some time and gives you the partial response. You can resume that saying download again after some time. So this kind of status code, the 206 partial content, is really helpful when you are dealing with large files or the streaming services. So any kind of streaming services like Netflix, they use these kind of status codes. So this is also a successful response, but it gives you partial content. So this was all about. So next come the 300 series response codes. So what is this 304 response code? This is 304 not modify response code, and it is most commonly used in REST APIs. So what is this? So we have already discussed in our previous video that REST APIs are cacheable. So they store some cache. So whenever you are requesting something, if you're requesting it multiple times, so server won't go to its database again and again. So it will hold the response in the cache and gives you back the cache only. So when it the data is not modified, it's coming from the cache, the server will inform you that it's not modified by giving response code 304. So what happens here is, whenever any client sends a request, so for example I'm sending a request of getting the product details again and again, so server will see that request, the response is already present in the cache, and it will send back the response back, the same response, and with the status code with the 304 not modified, that the whatever response you are receiving, the client is receiving, it's not modified and it's coming from the cache. So whenever you see something with 304, it's coming up from the cache. So let's see this example. So I have already used this one multiple times. I have already gone to this particular request again and again. So let's see what it's giving me. So if you see here, it's giving me 304. So why it's giving me 304? Because I have already gone to this request multiple times. So it's giving back the data from the cache. So it's 304 not modified. So that is the 304 not modify status code. In this video, we have covered most commonly used 2x and 3x status codes. And in the upcoming video, we will be covering 4x and 5x status codes in detail. So stay tuned and keep watching and learning. Thank you.